All right, it says we are live. Let's see here. Go into the shenanigans and says starting soon. Yep, okay. We are live. Let's see. Do we have anybody viewing us yet? Well, we can get things started, I guess. I don't know if anybody's in the chat yet. Probably give it a second. Let some people show up, right? That probably makes sense considering it's live.
Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it's lower or higher than others.
Yeah,
It's all good. A lot. I find for myself, I end up watching a lot of these live streams after the fact anyway.
true.
Just to hear the comments. So it's your call, man. You're the illustrious host.
The illustrious. I'll take it, man. Let's see. All right. Well, we'll probably get started. See if anybody piles in. Some people should soon. All right, guys. Well, welcome to Dark Knight Nation for our discussion on the rise and the fall of the DC New Age of Heroes. With us, we have a gracious guest by way of ComicBoom. What's going on, man? Thank you so much for being on.
I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this discussion, talking about the New Age for Heroes. It should be good.
Yeah, it's been the reception had in the beginning been pretty overwhelmingly positive, and then it seems like things have steeped off. I think, so for those of you that are watching that don't know what the New Age of Heroes are, in a post-metal Dark Knight's metal landscape, this tear in time and space have been opened up to the Dark Multiverse, unleashing the famed Dark Knights, which were these evil counterparts to Bruce Wayne. And through that, we get a lot of the content in the New Age of Heroes books, most of which spawn because of the tear in the Dark Multiverse or the happenings. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist. I don't know if I missed anything. What do you think?
I think you got it in a nutshell. I would add to that in actual fact, in the linkage between the New Age for Heroes and metal is a little bit. I think it's not quite as direct as people think. I mean, metal ended with the source wall basically being broken, and writers across the DC universe and all the mainstream titles ending with the New Age for Heroes are just basically taking that concept and they were just basically told editorially that, okay, the source wall's broken. Now we got all this darkness flooding into the DC universe. Run with it. See what you can do. And rebirth be damned. Just run with the darkness. Come up with what you want. This is the New Age of Hero stuff. And, like you said, we were talking earlier, obviously it was a great showboating of their artists and what have you. But to be quite blunt, I find that the connections to metal are tenuous at best. It's just basically darkness and say, oh, well, we have these darker characters now because the source wall is broken is sort of the loose explanation.
Yeah, and the timeline seems fairly indirect. I mean, the most relevant character to the happenings of Dark Knight's metal is Sideways. His powers directly result from the rift to the dark matter universe. Otherwise, most other characters got maybe a mention. That's about it. Like, we got a bit of the Immortal Men. We got a little bit of damage for literally the prelude issue, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah.
And they mentioned Silencer once too. So I mean, I wonder if editorially they were going to go more in the direction of pushing towards relation with the events of Dark Knight's Metal, because the original name of the line was Dark Matter. Or I wonder if maybe what had happened was they decided to change it because they realized that, okay, maybe we can't call this the Dark Matter line of books because it's not that close, to what happened in Metal.
Yeah, and it's a little frustrating because the topic that we're discussing here is what happened in New Age for Heroes, and implicit in the way the way that you chose to word this topic I think implicit is that people might get the impression that we're putting it down. I mean, it's got its, I mean, it is somewhat failing. It's not being commercially successful, but basically what happened to the New Age for Heroes is coming out of Rebirth and coming out of Metal. It's only it's only related somewhat, as we already described, and then to even throw more of a wrench into things, I think a criticism of it is that it sort of assumes that there's hyper time. I mean, already, I think it was in either Sideways or Immortal Men, because I caught up on my readings. They mentioned, I think there was an Earth 542, and there's some characters that came that are jumping from Earth to Earth. There's suggestion that there's hyper time. There's a suggestion, and then in Sideways character, young Derek, the protagonist, Peter Parker-like character, he can jump sidelines from one universe to the next throughout the multiverse. But the multiverse is now more than 52 worlds. And now, so all of a sudden, the multiversity, Grant Morrison's multiversity, where we have 52 Earths in the multiverse, suddenly we must have like literally tens of thousands more, and we have hyper time. Like, what are the rules here? What's going on? It's yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I feel like it's one of those situations where DC kind of, obviously they regret the New 52 for the most part, right? It was a financial success in the beginning, strictly because they were able to publish a whole new bunch of number ones, right? So the biggest thing here is that they're like, okay, we're like here's what actually bothers me. Let me put it in better terms. In the beginning, they slowly started to hint at the fact that because of Dr. Manhattan or some outside force, the DC universe lost its connection to hypertime. It's lost its connection to the infinitely many other worlds, right? And then now it's just like, okay, it's here. Like they had this great buildup towards what really happened to the DC universe, and now they're just like, oh, like you wanted hypertime, so here it is. I mean, throughout the Flash War in particular, he literally runs through hypertime. We got a nice hint to it in the Button, but then after that is when it just exploded, and they were like, okay, well, because hypertime exists, it's almost like we don't need to explain why things happened. So I feel like that's because DC told Jeff Johns, okay, you need to go in this particular direction with Doomsday Clock, and he decided not to. So they're just kind of slowly moving themselves in the direction that they wanted to go in without having anything relevant to explain it.
That's it's interesting that you mentioned Doomsday Clock, because I took some notes here in preparing for this, and I've alluded to this in some of my videos. I actually believe very strongly that the DC New Age for Heroes, in many ways, and even the darkening of the mainstream DC universe proper, with the Justice League, Titan, the Justice League, and all their other titles, which are darkening, I think it compromises the themes and the philosophies of Doomsday War, because the whole point of Doomsday War, Jeff Johns came in to Rebirth. Remember when that Rebirth one-shot came out? The very first line from DC was Jeff Johns. He talked about it. It was advertised. It said, "I love this world, but there's something missing."
Right.
And there was, and everybody knew what was missing from the DC universe. Everybody knew what that was, even without saying it. But the idea of rebirth and hope sort of are encapsulated that. And then with Doomsday Clock, there was a suggestion that Dr. Manhattan, that was darkening. Maybe Dr. Manhattan's responsible for the New 52, how dark it was. And so how do we get back that hope and rebirth? And so I think you're onto something there when you say that, maybe editorially something was going on there, where they said maybe Johns was going somewhere with Doomsday Clock, which, like, I think he had something to say about light and darkness, and about hope, and about the reality-based heroes versus the ones that are more vanilla sky, like Superman and Wonder Woman, and the difference between the mythological heroes like the Trinity versus the more down to earth and harsh heroes like the Watchmen. I mean, that juxtaposing of those two forces, it seems to me that Dan Didio comes along. Jeff Johns now loses his position as chief executive officer. Suddenly now this story that Johns is telling, focusing on the conflict between the darkness of the Watchmen universe and the lightness of Rebirth, suddenly that's thrown to the wayside, and all of the DC universe under Didio now is dark. And to me, it takes away from the theme of Doomsday Clock.
I think it, well, yeah. And then in the chat, Taylor Pector says he feels like the delays for Metal really didn't help matters either when it comes to the New Age of Heroes. I agree. I mean, the delays, I think it got oversaturated. I mean, I was the same guy that was so solid on every single tie-in for the longest time. The Dark Knights one-shots, fantastic. All the tie-in issues, I was pretty much already buying those books anyways. You know what I mean? But then, like, between them, like, okay, here's another book because you're going to buy it. Here's another book because you're going to buy it. And then, like Taylor said, the delays, like, it just lost value. And I also wonder if editorial had to step in there and be like, okay, well, they're taking too long on this. We still have to publish. Like, if I'm not mistaken, weren't all of the New Age of Heroes books delayed at least 1 or 2 months?
I honestly, I don't recall. I can't specifically recall if they were or not. It doesn't feel that way, but I would have to go back and look. I never got a sense that they were delayed, but
I think they did, because I remember, if I'm not, maybe someone in the chat can clarify, but excuse me, I was pretty sure that most of or at least the first wave or two of the New Age of Hero books were supposed to come out earlier than they actually did. But yeah, I mean, delays certainly don't help. And like we were talking about before, editorially, I think DC is crumbling. The beginning of Rebirth, fantastic. Like, if something was happening in some other book, in Batman, it was just like, oh, why isn't Clark in the leak here? Oh, because Clark's going off and dealing with this other thing in Superman. Go read it. Like, thank you. Like, thank you for giving me the taste of an established universe, because that's what you should be. That's what your company is promoting, right? So now I feel like they're just kind of busting their loads all over the place, because like, this story is going to sell, so forget continuity, you know?
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point. Just when it comes to continuity, Dan Didio has always been a huge proponent of story over continuity. In fact, the New 52 is Dan Didio's brainchild, really, and he finally got his wish. The New 52 abandoned continuity. And that's one of the reasons why ultimately I think it failed. Continuity, I think, is important. Coming into Rebirth, I think, people sometimes forget that, it was Jeff Johns that inspired Rebirth. Jeff Johns sat down and spoke to all the creators of Rebirth. He told them his ideas of the characterizations of the different characters and where to go. And he gave them a lot of inspiration. And remember, Dan Didio and Jeff Johns, they did that huge press conference where they talked about Rebirth before Rebirth, and they didn't exactly apologize for the New 52, but they came awfully close to apologizing for the New 52. Well, they didn't say the words, but they came very close.
Here's the thing in the end that made the New 52 tolerable for me, and it was how they approached what was going on in the overall scheme of Rebirth. Because here they say, okay, all this stuff you didn't like, we can give it a good narrative reason as to why you don't like it and how the hell it happened. So for me, reading Rebirth, I was like, wow, this is kind of worth it. Like, I mean, most of the books I read, I still enjoyed during the New 52. I read Batman, you know what I mean? I read Green Lantern. So I was happy. But generally speaking, I felt like what they were pointing at in Rebirth ultimately made the New 52 worth it, because they were building towards this crazy story. And I wonder if now, like, seeing the state of the current main line of DC books, are we really going to get that information in Doomsday Clock?
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait to see what Doomsday Clock is. I suspect that the answer in Doomsday Clock, I think it's going to be its own separate story, and I think I don't know exactly how it's going to tie into the mainstream DC universe, but I think ultimately that just tying this into our premise of what happened to the New Age of Heroes, I think that this points to the New Age of Heroes. It's very interesting that you said the original title was Dark Matter.
Right.
Well, and then they changed it to New Age of Heroes. It's funny that the title New Age for Heroes does not connote any sense of darkness in that title. It doesn't connote any sense of doom or gloom or darkness or metal, right?
Yeah.
It's very, and yet, with the exception of the Terrifics, there's darkness all over the place with the New Age of metal. And I think that the New Age for Heroes it's clearly, it's almost like a betrayal of the promise of rebirth. You know, I mean, all the mainstream DC titles have more elements of darkness with them presently. And then the New Age for Heroes, again, with the exception of Terrifics, which, surprise, surprise, is their best-selling New Age title.
True, yeah.
And it's the most reminiscent of a sense of hope and rebirth and fun and adventure, just like Adventures of Super Sons, which ironically enough was canceled and then had to be brought back in a 12-issue maxi series. It just seems, if they're looking at the evidence here, rebirth is still sells, but you got to come up with comic books that embody the sense of rebirth. And I think they can do that while also maintaining the market that they clearly have for their darker titles.
Yeah, and generally, we got another good comment from Taylor. He says he thinks one of the problems is with the double shipping. They told 4 years worth of story in 2, and he thinks that it burned out the writers. Also, he thinks that the initial pitches were for the first year. That's why most of the books got kind of fillery after 25 issues. Yeah, for the most part, I agree. I think that the double shifting can definitely get tiresome. There were some creators like Robert Venditti on the Hal Jordan book who I think was able to pull it off pretty much the entire way. It's just that I think that accompanied with the tiring aspect of having to double ship, the writers just they couldn't generate enough good story to make it in time, with the exception of a few, you know. Batman is for example, Batman is supposed to be their biggest selling book, unquestionably their biggest selling reoccurring title. And from what I've seen numbers, Batman jumps below now under 100,000 copies.
But it's still the best selling title. Well, I mean, it's still up there with Doomsday Clock and Justice League. They always sort of take turns, I think, being in the top.
But I feel like Batman under Scott Snyder, even when things got tiresome with the whole Jim Gordon thing, I don't think it ever sold under like 125,000 copies a month. Which,
well, that's just bear in mind though that Tom King actually broke Scott Snyder's record. He's sold consistently more consecutive titles. With issue 50, he sold more consecutive titles selling in excess of 100,000 copies. That beats Scott Snyder and Grant Morrison.
Really?
Yeah, he was complimented that on Twitter.
Really? Because every time I look at his stuff, man, I see it like low 100,000s, like 90,000s. I mean, maybe that includes like digital sales or something like that.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that he got a huge congratulations, and I mean he's on for 100 issues.
Yeah.
So, you know, well, I mean we're apples and oranges. Whether it's 90 or 100, it's still a pretty good selling title. But.
Yeah. I mean, but I guess the point I'm getting at is like I feel like these titles aren't doing as well as they were and as well as they could be. That's why with a little bit of this creative shakeup with new people on new books, I'm getting pretty excited. Just new ideas, man. I just want some new ideas, something fresh, something different. And I love Legacy and I want to continue to see it. And they found a good way to integrate the new and the old at the beginning of Rebirth. And I want to continue to see that a little bit.
Yeah. And I do think that, you know, I don't want to speak too negatively of the darkness. I'm enjoying Justice League with Scott Snyder. I'm enjoying even the new Teen Titans with the new character roster on Teen Titans with Damian, and I like Lobo's daughter there.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that they're definitely shaking things up, and they got to do what they got to do because, look, whether we like it or not, comic books are it's a dying medium, and you know, it's maintaining some consistency, and it's dying a slow death, but it's dying a death. And you know, when you look at it's a shame when we have billion-dollar industry in the movies and we're barely topping 100,000 in our top comic sales. It's absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. That boggles me that, you know, like you said, the superhero film industry is $1 billion industry, and yet nobody's picking up the source material. I don't know what they have to do or how to make it happen. You know what I mean? Like, that's part of the reason why I do YouTube, is to get both new readers into reading books and maybe old readers that haven't been on in a little while. You know what I mean? And it's good to, and the thing is, like, in the public eye, liking superheroes isn't as demonized, I guess. It's not to like a crazy degree, but it's not looked down upon like it used to be, you know, because literally everybody and their mom is going to see these movies with superheroes in them. So I don't know if it's just because people don't want to read. I mean, comics can also get pretty expensive.
Well, I think that Dan Didio raised a concern on that. He gave a very interesting comment. It was very revealing on his him and Jim Lee were interviewed, and he said something that's been quoted in various sources. You can find the interview online. He basically said that, as much as he hated to admit it, he felt that the movie Infinity War did comic books better than
comic books did. Yeah,
comic books, and it's very, very true. You know, because one thing that look, I love comics, and I'm addicted to them. I'll keep buying them, but the reality is that Marvel did a fantastic job. The movies, they've done such a great job into creating a massive narrative with individual self-contained movies leading to a larger narrative. It's extremely rare to find that in comic books. Even now, Marvel with their Infinity Wars series right now, it was terrible. I mean, each individual issue is not self-contained. It's hard. It's impenetrable to non-readers. And if, you know, the more I read, I can get familiar with it, but they're not good at creating self-contained epic tales anymore. It isn't like, you know, I can send somebody else and they can read the comic book Infinity Gauntlet, and you don't need to read, you know, you don't need to read anything else. But God forbid, I say, you know, with great respect to Scott Snyder, I mean, I challenge anybody to pick up Justice League No Justice and then the first 4 or 5 issues of Justice League. I mean, those are fairly, I think, unnecessarily confusing stories. And there's a reason why he started his own YouTube channel, because he wants to try to explain some of this stuff to get more people to buy the comics. And you should never have to do that.
I agree. I mean, I've had conversations with a couple writers on Twitter, and usually the general response is, I don't really want to have to overtly reveal the theme of my book or what's going on in my book or what I intend on doing with my book. And I love Scott Snyder, man. Like, you know what? Court of the Owls is one of the things that got me to nosedive into comics. So don't get me wrong. I love the guy.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think he's just spinning too many of his wheels on Justice League. And I respect the fact that he wants to break out of his comfort zone and do something more grandiose and make himself a little bit more of a diverse writer. But man, Scott is one of the best at what he does, and it's these small, not small, because they can still feel big, but in a much smaller setting. You know what I mean? That's the glory of his Batman run. The whole thing pretty much takes place in Gotham, and it's big and grandiose, and it's not world breaking, but it's huge. Like, the impacts and the consequences of his stories are huge, but told in a small sphere. And Justice League, like you said, is downright kind of confusing if you haven't been keeping up with everything. And even if you have been, it's just like the characterization, I don't think, has been great.
Well, he also said it's going to be 100 issues long. It's going to be 100 issues long.
I think he said. I thought he said 50.
Well, okay. If I'm wrong and it's 50, my point still stands, and that is that to remain committed for 50 issues for a storyline, it's exactly, I think, ironically enough, Dan Didio's point that, you know, people have to stay with you for the journey to appreciate the whole story. Like, 50 issues is a huge commitment.
Yeah.
to ask people to commit to one long arc. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your chain of thought there. But
No, it's okay. It's something valuable to say. I mean, just the thing is, the glory of Scott Snyder's writing is there are things that you don't necessarily need to know from something that he's written earlier, but if you do, it elevates the story, right? There was a lot in his Batman run that elevated the beginning of Metal. So if you've been reading his Batman, you feel great. You're just like, wow, like this is some of the payoff I'm getting for reading 5 years of or 4 years of Snyder stories. But the thing is, the payoff isn't so it's not interwoven. It's like, if you don't read this, you're not going to have any idea what I'm doing here. And, you know, I loved the first issue of Justice League. I thought it was great. Yeah. But after that, it's just been like, here's all this stuff that happens. Let me fit it into this 22-page comic book. You know what I mean? And I, you know, most of you guys know I had an interview with Brian Edward Hill recently. And one of the main things he distinguishes about the storytelling medium that is comics is the pacing is so much quicker. You have to go through the structure of a story in 22 pages. And I think Snyder is kind of starting to lose that.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I watched that interview with Brian Edward Hill, and it was I compliment you because you did a real good job on that. And
thanks, brother.
I appreciate the point that I remember very specifically that part of that interview when Brian Hill talked about that, because he was talking about the difference between pacing for a comic book versus a movie. From a writing perspective, a movie controls the pace, right. But when you read a comic book, I mean, the reader, in a sense, can control the speed with which they read the comic, but it's still important that, you know, that everything is properly explained, and there's, you know, obviously writing comic books is an art form,
right?
But I think there's also a little bit of a science to it, and I think that maybe was a part of what Brian Hill was getting at. Maybe is that there's elements of art and science in anything, and it's and I think that the real test of Justice League is the pacing. But
I think it's also and the next thing I was about to say was also echoed in the chat by Taylor, that Snyder is really good at world building, but his characterization is rough. Like when I'm reading his Justice League, his Barry isn't Barry to me. When he focuses down on one or two characters, I think he gets them for the most part. I think his Superman's been fine. I think his Manhunter has been fine. I think honestly, between Metal and his work on Justice League, I thought he's lost a grip on Batman and who Batman is as a character, because now he's just quippy and like just kind of grumpy. Like, the thing about Batman was he could be funny, but he had a really dry sense of humor. That's how you make Batman comedy work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, I think that generally he's not good at writing these big team books, and it's evident in Metal. He made fun of Aquaman talking to fish. Did you read Jeff Johns' new 52 Aquaman? Because he doesn't talk to fish. You made him talk to a fish because you thought people would think it's funny. Deathstroke was literally just a bro dude who liked to make jokes about Aquaman. You know what I mean?
No, it's interesting because bringing this back to New Age for Heroes, Snyder helped co-wrote, or he's of the New Challengers, and I made a comment on Twitter after I read New Challengers, and I was critical of it. And I can't remember my exact comment on Twitter, but I basically said that I thought it was basically somewhat convoluted, and I didn't, I thought it was unnecessarily confusing, and it wasn't clear. And Scott Snyder direct messaged me on Twitter. He's done that 3 times already in the last little bit. And I say this as a compliment to Scott Snyder. Because even when I'm critical, he will direct message me and he'll say, "Sorry you didn't like it. We're trying really hard to do our best." And it's just a really nice thing to say. And it's recognizing that the fact that he appreciates that people are reading his stuff, but he made the interesting comment. He actually, in defense, he actually said that he was helping another writer write this, and that they're doing their best, which really sort of drove home the fact to me that obviously the whole New Age of Heroes line, I think they were really hoping that they'd have some breakout writers as well as artists. Well, I guess the artists were already big, but so I think in that respect, I think that maybe this was supposed to be a vehicle for maybe newer talent, and that might also account, like, because we said what happened to the New Age for Heroes. Well, I think it just failed overall narratively because of the quality of the writing. I mean,
and tailing off that, as soon as New Challengers, when they first announced that book with Scott Snyder, they said, and I quote, Scott Snyder and Andy Kubert. And I'm like, wow, I don't really give a shit about the New Challengers, but it has Scott Snyder and Andy Kubert's names on it. So I'm going to buy it and I'm going to read it. And the thing that's been bothering me about DC with Scott Snyder is because people will buy things strictly off of his name. If he's like remotely giving any sort of pointers on a book, they will put his name on it. I feel like it happened with Batman Eternal. I think he wrote the outline of the story and all of the dialogue. It's like what Brian Hill was saying, it's like he was kind of the showrunner, but like he's like, here's where the story's going. You write the interpersonal relations, you write the characters, you write the dialogue, you write the little subplots going on here and here. It happened in Batman Eternal. Yeah. It happened in Batman and the Signal. It happened in Batman and Robin Eternal, but it actually paid off in Batman and Robin Eternal. I thought that was a great weekly series. It's happening here in New Challengers, and it even happened in the Batman Rebirth one-shot. If you remember, his name was on that book. You know why? Because they wanted to transition people from Snyder's run onto King's. So that's what kind of bothers me. I feel like they're making Snyder dip his feet in too many pools of water. Like, the man has two legs.
Yeah, and Scott Snyder, he just building on that comment, he gave an interview with Comics Conspiracy, a podcast. He gave an interview to Ryan Higgins, and he said that when in the build up to Metal, what was very it humbled him is he met with toy manufacturers, licensees, and people that were going to license the products to tell them what the story of Metal was. And so it's not just the story that he's dealing with. He has to explain and justify the story to people for the marketing. The marketing is a huge, massive industry itself for the story. And it's a huge thing. So when they come up with these ideas and they build on them and they're successful, there is a huge amount of pressure to keep that type of story alive. So it literally is the case that when DC has a success, they're going to duplicate it, and I really think that's what happened. I'm speculating here, but that's why we're talking. We're both speculating in some respects.
Exactly.
I really think that Metal, I think that they wanted Metal to be successful, and they suspected it would be. But I think the degree of success of Metal caught them by surprise. I really do. Even I was surprised by the success of Metal. I thought, if I'm brutally honest, I thought more wannabe Batman characters. I really didn't think they would catch on like they did. And it's interesting that the most successful and top-selling titles were the one-shots.
Yep.
The story itself of Metal, I tried doing a video summarizing what happened in those first 6 issues. It would take me about 4 hours to explain all that happened. It's complicated. It's all over the place. It's inconsistent. So much of it doesn't make a lot of sense. It still doesn't make a lot of sense. Try to get somebody to explain to you what happened in Metal. The only thing that they'll tell you is what you and I just said at the beginning of this podcast or this video, and that was that, all I know is that at the end the source wall broke, and then darkness came into our mainstream universe. But
yeah, and then we got the Justice League.
Yeah, and then we got the Justice League. But getting there, I mean, all those medals, there was like 9 medals, and I was able to identify like 6 or 7, but then there's sub medals that were involved in Batman opening up the Dark Universe, and there's so many moving parts, and now there's more moving parts with this other darkness, with all the other darkness coming in, and there's different darkness rules, and there's different forces coming in different titles. In all the New Age for Hero titles, everyone has a new dark entity coming in, unknown new dark entity coming in. Wonder Woman had that with the Dark Gods. Justice League, of course, now we got the 7 forces in the Justice League: the Steel Force, the Ultraviolet Corps, 5 unknown sources. We're in issue 5 of Justice League, and there's still 5 unknown forces. We don't even know what they are yet.
Yeah. I mean, and this is telling of what Metal was. He built so much up without taking the time to decompress. Metal, between all the tie-ins and stuff, was somewhere probably between 25 and 30 issues between the main books and the tie-ins. And to be honest, up until like issue 3 of Metal, I was so on board. Issue 2, like I was so into it, man. Like I went to New York Comic-Con. I bought like this special like artist print from the inker Jonathan Glapion. Beautiful looking prints, man. But every time I look at that shit on my wall, it reminds me of how disappointed I was by Metal. I was the one, like, dude, I was the one telling all my friends who were like kind of comic book readers. I was like, yo, go read this book because my favorite writer's on it. One of my favorite artists is on it. It's going to be bombastic. It's him fucking doing Batman again. And it's going to be great. And it was so cool in the beginning because between the prelude issues and the first couple issues of Metal, it's like Final Crisis. I was like, bet. That was the first thing I ever read. As confusing as it was, that's what got me into comics. I was like, cool. They're kind of harping on some cool Grant Morrison multiversal themes and ideas and concepts. And then it's just like, yeah, but like we're not going to explain anything and we're not going to elaborate. They're just here because you like them and because I think that's how we're going to bring the old fans back. And we didn't even like this issue 6, right? Like if I were to say how pissed off I was, like from a 1 to 10, I was at a good 12, dude. Like they didn't show how they beat the villain, but they had time to show a stupid dance party in Wayne Manor. Yeah. Like your pacing was already off and you just wasted like 2 or 3 precious pages on this thing that doesn't make sense because you're trying to like push the DC universe in this particular direction. But it's like, dude, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Yeah. We haven't changed the wheel. We haven't changed the shape of the wheel because it's not working. Everybody loved what was going on in DC Rebirth.
And I think that you make a very good point. The way I would restate what you just said by saying that for longtime readers like us, it's more bothersome that we don't have an explanation as to how the good guys won or how it was resolved. I hate having unanswered questions. Now, and at the same time, the best thing about issue 6, I think, was that beautiful page spread drawn by Mikel Janin on the Justice League. They showed the plans of the Hall of Justice, at the end, because all those additional pages. That was cool. And to be quite blunt, that's what everybody was talking about. That's what everybody was talking about, was the stuff that really didn't have much to do with the actual story itself. Just like with the breaking down. They never even did show the breaking down of the source wall. They just sort of said that happened. They never even explained what the source wall was.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Sorry to cut you off, but like visually it was cool. Like it was really cool fan service to see all that stuff. Narratively, it makes absolutely no sense. The last page of them revealing the plans to the Hall of Justice, I would keep it. No question. The dance party, though, characters that have gone on record saying they don't want to get involved. Like, yeah, I loved seeing Alan Moore looking Swamp Thing, but like at the beginning of Justice League Dark, where we pick up, he didn't want to get involved up until, spoilers, the end of the issue. So like realistically, like narratively, it doesn't make sense. You could have used that double page spread to show them beating Barbatos, who was this big badass villain that you built up for like a year. And if you look back, he's been referenced and mentioned since Grant Morrison's Batman. And I was like, this is awesome. We're going to see like this crazy, even if it's not this wild fight, we're going to see them find some intellectual way to take this thing out. And it's like, no, like we just got our Hawk people back, and Batman has shiny new batarangs, and next thing you know, he's just underground. Like, where's the payoff to your entire narrative? And if you're suggesting that it's going to be in Justice League or that it was going to be in No Justice, I haven't seen it yet. You know what I mean? And I think the reason I'm getting a little bit potentially overly passionate about this is because I love Scott Snyder and I want to see nothing but great work come out of that guy. Like, for Christ's sake, I have a Court of the Owls tattoo. Like, I love Scott and his writing. I love witches, and I love him as a person. Like, I've met the man. He is the kindest, most friendly creator I've ever met. And he always thinks about his fans, and I absolutely love him for that. And that's why I get passionate about why his books aren't what I hope or think they're going to be going into them. And I don't want to lose faith.
I think that in defense of Scott Snyder, and I know we're being a little bit critical of him, is that I think that when you're writing a huge epic story like Metal, and you've got it, you want to leave some questions unanswered in order to inspire future narratives and future stories. I get that. I guess the question is, at what point do you leave too many questions unanswered?
Exactly.
And that I think is the difference between an Infinity Gauntlet and a Civil War II.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's some things, if there's too much left unanswered, you're not going to have that epic, memorable tale. People will remember Metal, but I think we're going to remember Metal for all the, for just a bunch of crazy looking Batman and the source wall being broken. But the story itself is confusing, and it's,
you know what? And going off of what you said, I feel like they left the wrong things unanswered, and they didn't show what they should have shown. Like,
exactly.
Like I said, one of my biggest gripes is not seeing how they took down Barbados. We see people going in at him. Next minute, he's gone. Like, you've been building this big, gruesome villain up for forever and a half, and we don't see it. But we get that dinner party. Like, I'm sorry. Like, visually, it was nice. I love Mikhail Janon's art. I think looks great. And I loved seeing, like, the Justice League get together at, like, the quote-unquote round table. You know what I mean? Yeah. But, like, I feel like there are better ways you could have used panel space. And then B, like, Greg Capullo's art was killer. Like, that was one of the things that by the end of the thing, like, issue 6 looked great. The Trinity in the 10th metal armor looked sick. Batman throwing a batarang and lightning strikes in the background. Visually, this book is kick-ass. But it's like, where's the substance?
Well, not only that, and part of that substance could have been, and this is something that people have largely forgotten, is that all the members of the Justice League, they pushed Barbados back by making a wish. They held hands in a circle, and they made a wish. And Wonder Woman's wish was to have her Greek gods return. And of course, that was her Dark Gods saga in the Wonder Woman comic, which lasted 20-some issues. And Aquaman wished to be able to walk on land, and that's why Atlantis has risen in the pages of Aquaman, because that was his wish at the end of Metal. So that means that we have Superman and Batman and Cyborg and whoever else, and Flash, they all made wishes too. What did they wish for? Now, these are unanswered questions that at some point will be addressed. And the other questions, dare I suggest, could have been addressed in the New Age for Heroes. So another answer to the question, what happened to the New Age of Heroes? It squandered on its promise to build off of Metal. It didn't actually build off of Metal. And that's why New Age for Heroes failed. So if you come into New Age for Heroes thinking for a continuation of Metal in some capacity, you're going to be disappointed.
I agree with you in the sense that I think we should have gotten some resolution in the New Age of Hero books from Metal. But I think that the main narrative, it was responsible of Metal to answer. And the wishing just kind of felt like Jesus Christ, you might as well have introduced time travel and had them go back in time. Like if I'm not mistaken, and I might be because it's been a while, but like what, they open the source wall and then suddenly they get wishes, or is it because of the 10th metal?
The 10th, well, my understanding, okay, I might be wrong. My understanding is that it was the 10th metal, the properties of the 10th metal magnified their wish, and it was in conjunction because they were in close proximity to the breakdown of the source wall or something. It had something to do with that. So,
And it's like, that's like so Deus Ex Machina. Like the 10th metal could literally do anything, and that's such a weak way to resolve something. And like it's a storytelling trope. It's like the big thing they say in comics, right? Time travel ultimately is a cop out unless you have a narrative that no one else has done before, which is difficult to do. And I'm not saying that that's impossible. 2, wish making, cop out.
Yeah.
Like we read like almost 30 issues of comics for a cop out. And like I said, I love Scott. Like people in the chat like are probably like, oh yeah, this guy like hates the dude. I love him. Like he is, like I said, the reason I get so critical, and I've addressed this with Joey from Joseph's books on multiple occasions, is the reason I get so critical is because I like these creators and I don't want to have a bad taste in my mouth from them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And oh god damn, man. Like and going back, because I know, you know, we strayed off into metal, which is mostly my fault. But again, with the New Age of Heroes, we're not seeing a lot of resolution, like you said. We're seeing very little connection to metal, which I could get over. If the stories were consistent. I liked the beginning of Damage a lot, and then it's just like, what else are you going to do with it? And before I gave it the excuse that what are you going to do with a Hulk book, and then I started reading Immortal Hulk. I was like, that's what you can do with a Hulk book, something different, you know. And then Sideways, I think, has been pretty good. Terrifics has been great. You know, but like ultimately they're not those books that anymore that I'm like, okay, this book came out this week, I want to make sure I read it, you know. And we were also discussing before how they were potentially trying to use this as a gateway for new creators and for new writers, and I'm all for that. I am all for that. But you know what you should have done? You should have given them more of a sit back, study how this person is doing that will involve you in the book and in the storytelling process and the creative process. But they should have left these all-star writers to do their thing and kind of taken on these younger writers almost as a protege, right? Like, okay, like here, pitch me some story elements. If it's good, we'll throw it in. Or you have a couple lines here and there. Okay, it's good. But ultimately, it's just kind of annoying. You know what I mean? The way they handled it.
I'm going to suggest another reason, because I'm really glad, because I know that we're both sort of stream of consciousness kinds of guys. It's easy for us to digress because there's so much to talk about when we talk about the DC universe. But another reason that I think the New Age for Heroes has not been as successful as it could have been is that I believe that the DC universe with the New Age for Heroes has failed. They failed to capitalize on the gems that they already have in their universe. And I refer specifically to the multiversity and the multiverse, the 52 Earths. If you, I should get one of my favorite hardcovers is my multiversity hardcover of Grant Morrison, and that beautiful map of the multiverse, 52 Earths, and there's more than one dark Earth in the 52 orrery of worlds. There's even one DC universe, Earth in the DC multiverse, that has monsters on it, just monsters and just another darker type creatures. You could have gotten some publicity by advertising, finally exploring other areas of the multiverse with a New Age of Heroes. And because remember that it was in the second issue or the first issue of Metal, where Kendra Saunders took the map. She took the map of the multiverse and she flipped it over and she said, I thought that was a wonderful analogy. You know, she flipped over the map and the other side is dark, you know, and that was an interesting way to think of it, almost 2 or 4 dimensionally, in a sense, that the dark multiverse is on the flip side. Well, maybe there's a flip side. So maybe why can't there be a dark 52 Earths on the flip side? That's what I thought that meant. Yeah. If you're gonna take a map with 52 Earths on it and flip it over and say the other side it's just the flip side, it's the darkness, I'm gonna assume that there's 52 darker worlds, just like there's 52 light ones, right?
Well, I think in the Wild Hunt tie-in and in other metal tie-ins, they had pretty much established that the worlds of the dark multiverse had crumbled, right? When the worlds when the like when they pretty much started secret warring the main DC universe and the main DC multiverse and the dark multiverse. But like regardless, in the Terrifics they already established that the dark matter universe still exists. And it's like what we're like you said, we're not really getting an explanation or an exploration of what this is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. They've got so many tools in their wheelhouse, and they you know, I get really frustrated because I supposedly they go on these writers' retreats,
right? Yeah, the summit,
and they have these conversations. Like I don't know if it's a clash of egos or what, but I mean, like I'm sorry, I've been involved with large collaborations before. Somebody's got to make an executive decision, and last time I checked, that's supposed to be an editor in chief.
Right.
Say, let's get our shit together here and figure out. Let's establish the rules. I mean, they came up with the map of the multiverse. Well, we haven't even gotten stories in the multiverse yet, other than Multiversity. Yeah. Why haven't we? Why haven't?
They cut off. They had that Earth 2 society and like the Earth 2 book for a while, but they ultimately kind of crashed and burned because things kind of got a bit too confusing. Like I really liked it in the beginning. I think it was Rob Williams who was writing it, if I'm not mistaken. I might be incorrect, but I mean,
Earth 2 Society, wasn't that James Robinson?
James Robinson, that's it. Yeah. I enjoyed it in the beginning, and that's how I found Jorge Jimenez's art. But it's like the problem with DC is like you have all of these things that you just don't use. You know what I mean? It's like you're a kid and you have all these unopened toys that you just don't use, and they just sit there looking pretty. And like the thing that I think Jeff Johns is kind of understanding now that he's coming back into a more creative role is that, oh, people want Shazam because we've been holding on to him for all this time. Like, you bet your ass I want Shazam. You know what I mean? I don't know, man. It just feels so hectic. I don't know if it's because of editorial control and they're just not doing it right. I think one of the biggest things that bother me is I think his name is Mike Doyle. He was the Batman editor, and they moved him over to the Black Label books, and now look at what's happening to the mainline universe. I think that they need to focus on hiring good editors to keep some of this stuff under control and to not over or under regulate what's going on.
I think that's a different topic for another day. Like if you want to talk about editors, I think being an editor, I mean, I'm not an editor, but I always think that I know editors my understanding is that they have to do a lot of planning, and they got to make sure things are done on time, the art, the story, and they coordinate a lot of moving parts.
Right.
But one of the things that I think would be very helpful for a lot of them is you just can't replace knowledge of the DC universe.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't replace a lifetime of knowledge. That knowing the background of these characters is so important. So many stories could be corrected and made better simply with just little tweaks here and there to have it fit into continuity in such a way that you could still have a self-contained story and not compromise continuity. And all the tools that are in DC's wheelhouse, for them to keep coming, and every single one of these New Age of Heroes titles, with the exception of the Terrifics, which has some existing characters, they're all brand new characters.
Yeah.
And I can understand the reason for that, because maybe some of the creators get some rights to it. Maybe they get some royalties from newly created characters. That might be one of the reasons why they want to break new ground, and they want it to be in the mainstream universe. And who knows, there might be contractual reasons as well. But it just seems to me that it just seems like I just feel heartbroken, because that's 7 titles. Unexpected, Damage, Sideways, Immortal Men, Silencer, The Curse of Brimstone, and the Terrifics. It's sad to see all those that might be going by the wayside. We already know that the Immortal Man is being canceled with issue 6.
Really?
As far as I know, that as far as I know, that is the rest are still hanging on to existence, but I don't see any of the other ones lasting more than 12 issues, except I
The
suspect that,
Terrifics.
yeah, it's Terrifics and Sideways, I think, are going to last longer.
I agree. It's and the thing is, like, the shifting of talent too has obviously played a huge contributor. You know, we were talking about previously how after about 2 or 3 issues, a lot of the superstar artists that they hardcore marketed left the books. And now even like if you look at Sideways, right, they had been like, okay, like Dan Didio's going back to writing for a while. He's not on the book. If you read the last 2 issues, his name's not on the cover. So you know, and it's like, okay, you might as well just take Snyder's name off of New Challengers because it doesn't feel like his content, and you're wasting Andy Kubert. So put like, you know what I mean? It's good to see that we have one superstar artist still on a book, but at this point, with the way the narrative is going, I'd just rather see Andy Kubert on a better written book. You know what I mean? Um, it's and the thing is too, Taylor had said in the chat a little while ago that the whole shepherding new writers thing was started with like of recent years was started with what Snyder did with James Tynion, but like I don't ever remember James Tynion striking out super hard. You know what I mean? Like he wrote a Batman annual I didn't love once. Sure, it wasn't bad. And then he pretty much spearheaded Batman and Robin Eternal, which I think was very good for a weekly series. And then he had Detective, and his run on Detective was great. Justice League Dark #1 was fantastic. So I think that the idea for shepherding this new talent is really, really good, and it'll help build a younger industry and a younger mind, but they're not handling it right. Like I said, if they were to take these newer writers and just have them kind of be under the wing of the superstars that they promised and let them learn from them rather than just be given a plot, I think that things would turn out differently.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I was going to. I think we've addressed. I think so far we've given at least 5 reasons why of what happened in the New Age for Heroes and why it's not been as successful. And I'll say the first 5 because we just talked about this already. The first reason, in terms of what happened in the New Age for Heroes, we talked about why Metal may have caught DC by surprise, the success of Metal coming out of Rebirth, and they sort of doubled down on it with the darkness, and that led into maybe a focus, maybe too much darkness on most of their titles with New Age of Heroes, and the focus on Doomsday, the focus on the darkness is in the DC universe undermined the impact of Doomsday Clock, compromised its themes, and it betrayed. It didn't really. It also never continued the out of New Age for Hero, out of Metal. It never really answered some of the questions of Metal. It just sort of it only touched upon it.
Yeah.
The loss of artists. I mean, the artists were only on for a couple issues, and then they seemed to. It's sort of like they lured us in with a piece of bread, and then they smashed our effing heads. It's like, you know, they lured us in with all this talk of great art, and then all of a sudden they just sort of left, and it's like suddenly the lights were on, but nobody was home.
Yeah, and again, like going off of that, Taylor had actually said in the chat, Andy Kubert is actually leaving New Challengers after issue 3. And he also brought up a point that New Challengers is only a 6-issue mini anyways. So you're going to like that also doesn't make any sense. You have 6 issues. Why are you splitting it between 2 artists? That's one of the things like DC, I feel like, you know, whether it be the double shipping or something else, like you should keep one artist per arc.
Yeah.
Like because it changes the tone of the book. You know what I mean? Like art, as much as people, you know, people have different ways of crediting how they end up emotionally feeling after reading a comic book, right? Some people say the art, some people say the writing. It's definitely for me a combination of the two. And the fact that you're changing these artists whose styles for the most part aren't remotely similar to the ones that we got before, it changes the feel of the book.
Um, I feel compelled now to say to make some comments on about what I like about the New Age for Heroes.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
I actually, I want to. I think we would be doing it a disservice if we didn't talk about some of the things that worked.
Good point.
I'll start first. I wanted to just my favorite character out of all the characters in all the New Age for Heroes, it's in the unexpected, and it's the character of Firebrand. Mm-hmm. She's got a conflict. Her heart is actually a conflict engine, and she has to fight in order to stay alive.
Jeez.
But she's a paramedic by day. She's actually a paramedic, so she's someone that was raised to be kind of like a caregiver, and so she's used to helping people. She's not used to beating the crap out of people, but she's got to beat the. She actually has to get into a fight in order to power up her conflict engine. And darker forces in the multiverse want to steal her heart, literally, because it's a unique sort of mechanism. And right. So, anyways, it's a cool character. My second favorite is Silencer. I just think it's refreshing. I actually found it to be surprisingly, even though it's she's just a hit person. She's a hitman like Deathstroke, but I like the fact that it reminds me of Lady Killer. She's like a black version of Lady Killer, Joelle Jones series Lady Killer, which is really good, about a female hit woman in the 1950s. Silencer, I like the fact that she balances family with being a hit person. My fourth one is Ghost Fist of Immortal Men. And he can draw kind of energy out of his air and redirect it with each strike. And my fourth favorite is Reload. Now he can subtract time and fire the same bullet out of the same gun multiple times. So it's kind of a cool power. Yeah. I know it's that time travel thing again we talked about. He's cheating, but it's kind of cool. He literally keeps refiring the same bullet again and again.
But that's the thing that makes it unique, though. Like I said, anything to do with time travel can be redeemed if it's something unique and it's something different. You know what I mean? Like that in that particular situation, like his power set is cool and it's different and it's unique and it's something I've never seen before. Yeah. But you know, the difference between that and the time travel that people generally don't like in storytelling is when they use it to resolve a plot. So, I mean, that's a really cool idea. And when it comes to Steve Orlando's Unexpected, I mean, I've had a conversation with you, not too long ago about my recent distaste of Steve Orlando. So maybe I should be reading The Unexpected. I picked up the first issues and just decided based on his previous work that I wouldn't read it. So, based on your suggestions, I'll probably go check it out.
Well, but, I think you'll like The Unexpected. I'm not a fan of Steve Orlando. I liked his Apollo Midnighter. I'm not a fan of his Wonder Woman. I don't like his vision of Wonder Woman. And I have a feeling I won't. Well, actually, I don't like his. I'm not a big fan of his Wonder Woman, but he's I don't know. He's okay.
I'm not really a big fan of his anything. I mean, the Batman Night of the Monster Men I was so excited for because I love seeing C-list Batman villains get a little bit more love and get a little bit more to be put on a higher pedestal, right? To be elevated as a character. Yeah, Kite Man.
Hell yeah!
Hell yeah! But like the thing is, man, I lost my train of thought. But Hugo Strange, yeah, the dialogue was weird. The storytelling was like there were too many plot threads hanging of what was going on, and then his JLA, the Rebirth one shots were great. And then once he got into the actual story, it just got static and boring. So I'll check it out. It sounds like almost like his interpretation of like a Doom Patrol, which I think sounds pretty cool. I've been really into the Terrifics. I think that the dynamic is the Fantastic Four that Marvel finally just this week got to putting back out. Yeah. I think that I mean, realistically, like we said, these are all reflections of Marvel characters, because at the time of their inception, Marvel wasn't doing Marvel right, so DC decided to try and do Marvel right. And Sideways is a Spider-Man analog that I love. I think he's quippy. I love his relationships with the different supporting characters.
Yeah.
I think that the Kenneth Rocafort art that we got for what 3 or 4 issues was really good and very fitting. Tonally, I think it's great. I don't have a lot of big issues with it, besides like some quirkiness kind of getting a little bit in the way of storytelling, but it's not huge. And if it were, I'd probably bitch and moan about it. But yeah, Sideways, I've liked it from the get-go. Damage, I think, was interesting for 3 issues, and then it just became,
well, interesting with Damage. I think I still maintain, just like you made a very good point with the Hulk. There's so many different ways you can write the Hulk to make Hulk interesting. It's the same thing with Damage. It has so much potential, Damage, but Damage became, each individual issue had a different hero in it. First, it was we had Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad, and then Solomon Grundy, and then it was like Damage was walking through the DC universe, fighting everyone he could, and each issue was just you could almost tell that it was just a showboat for artists to show off their artistic talent, potentially, because it was just showing death, destruction, and mayhem. But somewhere behind there, I was looking for a story, and I just, all it did was it screwed up Poison Ivy's origin, and it made Poison Ivy totally inconsistent with Tom King's Batman. And
I mean, Tom King already made Ivy consistent with what Ivy had been doing up until then. So
exactly.
I mean, the thing is, I really enjoyed the first like 3 issues of Damage. The art was great. Tony Daniel is a star when it comes to pencils. Certainly. And I think that they were building a fairly interesting narrative. It was kind of like Hulk meets Captain America in a sense. So I was really into it. And then, like you said, it literally just became all about, here's Damage versus this other thing in the DC universe. And while I love that you're trying to kind of fold these characters in and make people realize that, yes, they do share a continuity with the main line, it's just like you need to establish the story first. And I think it's really unusual because writers like Venditti are usually very consistent with their storytelling. So that's why like it kind of tripped me off my feet a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But yeah. So you like so what's your favorite character out of the Terrifics?
I'd probably have to go with Plastic Man. I think Lemire really knows how to write Plastic Man. I kind of honestly started really getting into Plastic Man like from the Justice League animated series, and then we got like a second of them in Metal, and now Gail Simone has this book out, and I was keeping up with like the Injustice comics, and he's just such a fun character because you can do so much with him, and he's one of those, like he's so incredibly powerful, but because of his nonsensical nature, he doesn't really exploit his powers. I don't know. I mean, and I like, trust me, man, Batman's my favorite character, so I'm all for the cool, gritty, murderous stories, but like it's just, he's like straight funny, and he adds a lot to the team dynamic. A very close second is I like Metamorpho. I like that he's getting some love because he's an interesting character that can do a lot. There's a lot of potential with him in terms of storytelling.
That they seem to be building on his mythology and his background in the Terrifics now with that new enemy and that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they even use Simon Stagg as the way to introduce Metamorpho back into the public eye, which I thought was great. I thought that was a great little, nod to continuity and to his origins. I mean, overall, Terrifics is a solid book. The art's good, even when the art changed, it changed to a good artist. So I don't really have any major complaints.
And I also think Tom Strong. I know that buddy of mine's Spike Valentine. It's one of his favorite characters, and I remember Tom Strong quite fondly too from America's Best Comics back in the day. And he's in the Terrifics too. He's supposedly dead, but he's. I like that they incorporated him from the multiverse, and I think he's going to be making his way back. And so I'm really looking forward to that. They have a lot of good, fresh ideas. But I gotta make one fanboy, purient fanboy, X-rated complaint about the Terrifics, about Phantom Girl, and I can say this because I'm pushing 50, and but Phantom Girl, she should be bigger breasted, she should be an older character, and I just wish they would have. She should be a Power Girl type character. I like the old Phantom Girl with the classic suit with the bigger breasts, with the whole 9 yards. And I think they should have went that route instead of the route that they did do. And that's just, I know I'm sounding very white male and fanboyish, but I wish they'd have gone a little bit more old school with Phantom Girl.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own taste, so I'm not knocking it. I have no previous experience with Phantom Girl. So when they had released the promo images and they had shown her, I had no idea who she was, and then I had asked around. I don't mind it. The only thing that I kind of have an issue with is, like, I feel like every team book has to have a Raven analog now. She feels a lot like a Raven analog. They're doing it in Teen Titans. We have actual Raven in the Titans. We have, Phantom Girl. So I think in terms of, like, characterization, it can get a little bit boring. And it can get, especially when someone like, yourself or me, who's reading all three of those books, it can get a little bit repetitive. But you're obviously entitled to your opinion. You're a longtime fan. And if, that's something you prefer, that's something you prefer. I don't knock it.
You got to be, just like nowadays, you got to be so careful on Twitter when you comment. You're always, a lot of what sexiness and, just the embodiment of female and manliness in comic books. I mean, I don't know. I got nothing against that. I kind of like that. This whole, I don't mind the whole going realistic on body type and body image and all that stuff like that. But to me, at the end of the day, comic books are about wish fulfillment and fantasies and about the, right. And so, I like a little bit of risque.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more in the ballpark where I think there's definitely a happy medium. I think both have their place. Like you said, comics is ultimately wish fulfillment and kind of role play in a sense. You read these things, you're like, wow, like, what if I could be here? What if I could do these things? But at the same time, I think, it's important to represent some sense of normalcy, because that's what grounds some of these stories and makes them a little bit more relatable. So I think there's definitely a midway point, and, like, discussing, like, the heritage of characters. Taylor in the comments says that he thinks that the problem with Damage, that there's also a JSA character named Damage, and that he was pretty confused when it was first announced. And on that, I don't have a heck of a lot of experience with the JSA. And when they had introduced Damage and mentioned him in the Dark Knight's Metal one-shots, I was a little bit confused, because as far as I had known, there was a character that had already existed. However, I didn't know much about him, but I had seen random images here and there, and I was like, okay, so they decided to turn this guy into the Hulk. What's going on?
Well, I think Damage was a character in, I think he was actually a former Teen Titan character. There was Dan Jurgens did a Teen Titans series in the early 90s, and there was a character named Damage in it, who ended up getting his arm ripped off by Superboy Prime in Infinity Crisis. So, which is another interesting rumor, that the rumor is maybe the source wall being broken, we're going to get the return of Superboy Prime. That's a character I've never really liked, but that rumor's been floating around.
Oh, I'd put money on it.
Yeah,
because he's an easy way out of making a villain a massive threat at this point. I think there's a way to doing it, and I think there's a way to make it interesting. But by the way the course of Justice League has been going, we'll see how it's handled. But I've already kind of overextended my welcome on talking about the negatives of that kind of stuff. But in another positive light, I think Sideways is very refreshing. Considering Dan Slott, for the most part, up until maybe his last couple of months on Spider-Man, hadn't been writing Spider-Man. He hadn't been writing a character that everybody had grown up to know and love. And Sideways is no doubt a pure ripoff of a young Peter Parker. And I couldn't be more fine with that. And I think he's interesting. I think that his dynamics with his supporting cast is great. I especially love his like relationship with his mother and the fact that they're adopted, and how, you know, it kind of deals with the thematics of bond, of
Yeah.
you know, of familial bond, and how, you know, creating those things isn't necessarily through blood.
I, I
And his
take it. I take it you haven't read the latest issue then.
No, I'm one issue behind actually.
Oops. Well, you mentioned his relationship with his mother.
Well, I mean, even in the last issue I had read, you know, things were starting to get a little bit tense between him and his mom. But
Oh,
you know,
she. I,
no.
I hate to break. Yeah, the relationship becomes permanently severed. I hate to break the news to you.
Oh Jesus.
Did I just spoil it for you?
Yeah, kind of. But
So see, now the only thing is, though, now it's like a Spider-Man analog for sure, because Peter Parker lost his Uncle Ben, and now Sideways is lost.
I mean, now that you mention it, I feel like I should have seen it coming, because they started to show the tension building with him and his mom, and how like he kind of even acknowledges that he's being a dick, and he's like, I'm gonna fix it. So it makes sense that, you know, something happens to her, because then the entire motivation for him to be a hero is because he regrets, you know, his final moments.
Yeah, they kind of played their hand, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's ultimately, I think I love his relationship with his best friend, Ernie. I think that it's really, I mean, the obvious looming love, you know, between the two is budding, but I think that aside from that, like her busting his balls all the time, I think is funny. It's kind of what I want to see out of a more lighthearted book like this, and how pretty much the entire series he's just kind of been messing up. And I think that will thematically tie into the fact that up until apparently this recent issue, he doesn't really have a legitimate drive to be a hero. He does it for the success, just like Peter did when, you know, he was trying to make money off of it in early continuity. So and his costume looks sick. I mean, I dig his costume. So
And I actually, I know a lot of people initially were criticizing that the character as being too much like Peter Parker, and to be quite frank, there's so much like honoring and repeating character themes in comic books. It's about bloody time that DC had a Spider-Man analog. Quite frankly,
yeah,
I mean, we got Moon Knight reflecting Batman in Marvel Comics. We got Quicksilver in the Marvel Universe, Flash in the DC Universe. Why the hell shouldn't we have a Sideways versus, you know, as opposed to a Spider-Man? I mean, to me, it just makes sense.
well, I mean, yeah, a great majority of Marvel's A-list characters are ultimately ripoffs of DC. You know, when people play that game with, oh, who stole more from who, like the number might be the same, but look at Marvel's A-list roster. Most of their A-list are DC analogs. And you know what? You know, shit, man, like hand DC a bone and just let them have it. Because if you think about it, you know, most of the characters that you know and love from the movies are some sort of ripoff from DC, you know. And to be quite frank, nobody would exist without Superman. So everything stems from DC Comics. But aside from that, yes, Sideways I think is an interesting character, and they filled the void that Spider-Man fans had, because Dan Slott, quite frankly, wasn't writing Spider-Man. You know, up until, from what I've heard, the last couple of issues. But
Well, you mean somebody else was, or what do you mean?
no, as in Dan Slott wasn't writing a Spider-Man that people know and love. He was writing this character that he was trying too hard to shape into his own. You know, like I haven't heard anybody thoroughly compliment Dan Slott's Spider-Man in like 2 or 3 years. Up until he got Peter and Mary Jane back together. You know what I mean? But it took years and years and years of people shitting on Dan Slott to make it happen. So the fact that DC is like, okay, the world is kind of missing Spider-Man. They're missing the essence of Spider-Man. Here he is, you know?
Yeah.
And Taylor makes a good point at saying that isn't Jaime Reyes basically a Spider-Man analog? Yeah, but I feel like they realized the failure in the Rebirth Blue Beetle book. As much as I didn't want it to be, they more than likely figured, okay, with this new universe, we can give it another shot. And at that point, I think they're being even more apparent that it's a Spider-Man ripoff. You know, I'm not calling Jaime Reyes subtle, but it's certainly not what Sideways is, you know.
Yeah. Well, Keith Giffen wrote Blue Beetle, and I don't think I just don't. I'm not a huge fan of Keith Giffen. I don't think he's. I think he's past his prime. He's been out of his prime for about a decade and a half now. But yeah, I don't think Blue Beetle maybe had the potential to be like a Peter Parker in terms of popularity, but that's been squandered multiple times over. If they're gonna do anything with Blue Beetle, they should just put him with Booster Gold and have a Booster Gold Blue Beetle buddy series or something, and have them traverse the multiverse and have some fun.
In the Blue Beetle Rebirth book, they already addressed the fact. I mean, unless something happened, because I stopped reading after like issue 2, they already addressed the fact that Ted Kord's still alive.
Yeah.
So they might as well just put the original Blue Beetle up with Booster Gold, because they're doing. I mean, we'll see what they end up doing with Booster and this whole Sanctuary thing. Ultimately, up to now, I think it feels very forced.
Yeah.
But aside from that, with Sideways, I mean, his powers are kind of cool. Like the rifting is obviously some sort of analog to web slinging, but like to the nth degree. And then like you see in the books that he can actually do damage with them, because the edges of the rifts are immovable, and you introduce this big celestial thing that's kind of trying to work with him. I mean, I think that the narrative is interesting. We'll see how I feel about the next issue when I watch things go down. But ultimately, so far, I've really enjoyed it. It's one of the books that I actually keep up with.
Well, and I think the potential for Sideways to have, because he's almost like it's the home of the Huguenots or whatever. It's like he's one of the policemen. He basically helps police the hyper time multiverse to prevent realities from converging onto other realities. But yet, where was he during Metal? Because obviously the Dark Universe came in, and there was no. Is he the only Sideways character, like the only policeman, so to speak? Like I would think there would be like almost like a core of Sideways characters that are policing the multiverse in different realities. You know what I mean? I would think he's not the only one. So I think there's a lot of potential for the concept to expand. Sort of like the Spider-Verse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that maybe what they're trying to get at is because of Metal, it took all that maybe to alert these tempests of hyper time. But I definitely see where you're getting at with that, for sure. I mean, so we've kind of gone across like what we really, really like about and what we really, really don't like about the new heroes. So what would you do to start fixing things?
Oh boy. Wow. Okay, well, I'll start. I'll go one at a time. With respect to the Immortal Men, I would leave that canceled because it's not. I just think it's badly written. And if you want to know how bad the premise of the Immortal Men is, I think it's in issue 2 or in issue 3 where the immortal, the oldest man, the oldest human who's been recruiting. Let me just give you a bit of background. The Immortal Men. The premise is basically they're over the tens of thousands of years, the Immortal Men have been recruiting 300 people, various people with powers, throughout over thousands of years to recruit them to ultimately to maintain a status quo between an ultimate evil and an ultimate good.
So it's the Illuminati.
Kind of, yes.
Okay.
But right off the bat, in the first issue, everyone's looking for this Caden character. This Immortal Man's looking for the Caden character because he's really special. But the other 300 warriors are wiped out by this Infinite Woman. That's her name, Infinite Woman or whatever. Okay. And no one really knows. Okay, why did they kill them out? They want to wipe them out, and there's this agenda, and this Immortal Man. At one point, he says that his goal is to ultimately it's people just doing good and acts of kindness throughout time that ultimately is going to save humanity. And it's so cliche and one dimensional in its scope. Like it didn't seem like there's a lot of thought that went into it.
Yeah.
And yet the characters are kind of cool. But that to me is, I would take Infinite Woman and actually that's really the only character that she maybe has some potential. She interacts with the Batman Who Laughs. I'd take that character, and I would actually mix her up and have her interact with the Unexpected. I think the Unexpected should continue. I think that I would prefer to. I still like the idea of moving him elsewhere in the multiverse and putting him on somewhere else in the multiverse, so you can do more with the characters, and that way they can interact with other areas, people in the multiverse. Because I don't think we need them in the DC universe. I don't know if they really add anything. I don't think we need more of these new characters, to be honest with you. I'd rather have them in the multiverse and cross over.
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from with that. I think that. See, there's the thing. A lot of them I really don't know what to do with. Taylor in the chat had brought up Jaime being a Teen Titan. I would probably put Sideways on the Titans, on the Teen Titans. Obviously not with Jaime because the dynamic would be a little bit too similar. But if we're solely addressing what we would do with the New Age of Heroes characters, I'd probably do that with him. The Immortal Men. I think the thing that's ultimately a little bit disappointing was like. I was so high on James Tynan's Detective Comics run and the fact that Jim Lee was going to be on the book and the idea of the Immortal Men, because the way they had introduced like this Illuminati that it's existed since the beginning of time with some of DC's oldest characters, I was like, wow, like that's going to be cool. And then they use all these nameless things. Like what happened to Raish? What happened to Shazam? Like the Wizard Shazam? What happened to all these characters that like you showed with like the hoods on in the Dark Days? I would if I were to keep the Immortal Men around, I would shift it into what they had essentially introduced this group as characters for the most part that we already know. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with introducing new ones, but give me a book with this Council of Immortals like Vandal and Raish and the Wizard Shazam and like that would have been so much more interesting to me.
For sure. It's the old idea of using something familiar in order to in order to build up something less popular, and then right. It's sort of like a rising tide, raises all the ships type
right.
of thing. And I think I would like to see the Silencer in Deathstroke. Putting her a guest star more in Deathstroke would be a good idea.
Didn't they do a crossover with them, or aren't they planning it?
Maybe they are. Well, Deathstroke was in Silencer.
Yep. Yeah.
But I think the Curse of Brimstone maybe could be, maybe they could have Firestorm crossover in that comic, because even I know it might be a little bit cliche, but the power of Brimstone, the origins I think are somewhat. I think they're kind of mystical.
He's literally Ghost Rider.
Well, yeah, but it needs to be built upon. So I think there's a lot of. It would be kind of cool to see how his mystical-based Ghost Rider-like powers is similar to Firestorm, or how different it is. I think there's a lot to play with there.
I think they should use him as a cameo character in Justice League Dark.
That's an excellent idea, and I think that if from a psychological angle, to what extent does Brimstone's powers, does it have? I don't know, but he's got to be more than just a character that burns people,
right?
Like does he actually, maybe does he burn the soul in some metaphorical way or mystical way, or I just don't know. It's only on issue 4, I think now, or 5. I might be missing an issue, so feel free to spoil it, because I know I ruined Sideways.
No, it's okay. Honestly, I read the first 2 issues and felt things getting really dry, and I think that's a fairly common thing among the New Age of Hero books, except for, like I said, maybe Sideways and the Terrifics, and I haven't gotten to touch upon the Unexpected. But I think generally, from what I've read, like Silencer, I think that they should do like a Deathstroke storyline with all of these like maybe these hitmen in the DC universe going after like this one big thing. It's kind of like, you remember how you read All Star Batman, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Remember the first arc, how literally everyone and their mom was going after Batman because Two-Face had some dirt on them. I think you take the idea of all of these hitmen in the DC universe going after this one thing, and you do that in a Deathstroke book, and you have like Deathstroke and Silencer and a bunch of other people, not specifically for the same reasons, have another motive, another reason for this whole thing to go down, but do something like that, where you can integrate Silencer more in the DCU. And from what I understand, based on a conversation I had with Comic Book University, they're already going to be using Silencer in the Arrowverse.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could have her interact, for the sake of promotion even, and I don't think it's a terrible idea narratively, have her interact with the Green Arrow.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it is, and actually, that reminds me that you raise it. You allude to another point, is the other thing that all the characters in the New Age for Heroes sort of indicate that there's a lot more diversity. There's some additional diversity with the characters that I think that might also have been part of DC's thinking as well, sort of broaden the diversity of their line a little bit more, and obviously it'll pay dividends in other media, and of course Silencer with in the Arrowverse is certainly an example of that. So a lot of times it's just about introducing these characters. They might not be popular now, but further down the road, when you get a different writer, a different creative team, these things are always cyclical, so they might not hit now, but they might hit at some point in the future. So
yeah, and I think partially too is if you want to get some of these books to survive, for the most part, the ones obviously that we were talking about that aren't doing as well, why don't you kind of put feelers out to, in a writer's summit and say, hey, who actually has a good idea for this? Who wants to break story with these characters and make these characters something that you can throw under your belt, like what, Grant Morrison did with Animal Man, for example, rather than taking these, because what I think here's the issue, because I'm all for, like I said earlier, I'm all for new writers coming on board and getting a chance to kind of dip their feet in the water. But the thing is, they're just like, okay, like, you guys want to write for us, write this plot, write this story that's already been established. Whereas you could be like, okay, this exists. Who has an actual idea for these characters that they can make their own? Because ultimately they're not, it feels like they're not, these new writers aren't writing their story. They're writing a story that someone else gave to them, and we're told, okay, like, make something good out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like somebody like doing most of the equations on my math homework, or doing like half of a problem for me on my math homework, and then me trying to figure out the rest when I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's an extraordinary amount of pressure to put on a new writer, because they're not only writing new stories, they're writing about new characters. Right? I mean, arguably, you could take a totally new writer that's inexperienced and have him write Batman. Of course, they would never do that, but if they did that, Batman would still sell, right? Because it's Batman, right? So that's, if you really want to help a new writer, you'd think you'd give him, a less used, but take the most popular unused character and maybe give that to a new writer, like maybe, for example, Shazam, or, Captain Marvel or whatever. And that's the other thing. And maybe you asked earlier about what are some ideas to help boost up the New Age of Heroes. Well, there's a whole slew of B-list characters in the DC universe, and like the B-list characters that you love, that when they show up in Batman, why not have them show up in the New Age for Heroes? Why not have Kite Man show up? I don't know, like just throw stuff at a wall. But when you have all these toys in the toolbox in the box, why not use them?
Exactly. I mean, even that way you brought up, that would be funny. I mean, Derek James Sideways, he lives in Gotham. Like, how funny would it be if he opens a rift and then like Kite Man accidentally flies through a rift and ends up in that like middle space between hyper time? Like, you could do something with that that's both dramatic and funny. So I agree. And while we discuss this, something I want to ask to the people who are watching and who are familiar with the New Age of Heroes, what would you guys do? What are some ideas that you have to fix the New Age of Heroes and make it even remotely appealing? Would you cancel some books and focus on others? Would you change the creative teams? Just throw some stuff out there to be part of the discussion. But I mean, yeah, I totally agree. You have all these toys to play with. Why the hell aren't you playing with them? And the thing was, I was hoping DC was starting to wise up on that, because we have a Hawkman book now. We're getting a Shazam book, and we have a Plastic Man miniseries. So I hope that they start to move the New Age of Heroes in that direction, where, like you said, we get a little bit more love with these characters that people kind of know about, but could get a little bit more panel time.
No, it sort of like reminds me of in the first issue of Adventures of Super Sons, like all these crazy young Rex Luthor, and all these little crazy younger villainous kids. I mean, just thinking outside the box a little bit, and just having some fun with it, because I think, I mean, it's no coincidence that the best, most beloved of the New Age titles happens to be Sideways and Terrifics, which happen to have more fun and adventure in them and less darkness.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely not one of those guys that, that, for example, the people that like shit on the DC universe solely because it's dark. There are other reasons to shit on the DC, extended universe of the worlds of DC, whatever they're calling it now. But darkness, I don't think is a thing. Generally, I think that the glory about having a line like this, for the most part, with characters that we don't really know about, is doing something different and doing something diverse along the line, and not just in the cast of characters, but in the story and the tone. You know what I mean? So I think there's definitely a place for darker stories in there. I just don't think they've hit it,
Yeah, no, I hear
you. I mean, there's a lot that I think you can do. There are books that I'd cancel. There are some characters that I would probably bring in to other things. Like I said, Brimstone, I'd probably cancel and have him as like a reoccurring cameo on the Justice League Dark book. Sideways, I'd keep his book, but if you had to get rid of it, I'd throw him on the Teen Titans. Damage, they've already integrated the Suicide Squad. Do something with him on the Suicide Squad. And I think that what's going on with the New Age of Heroes is indicative of what's been going on in the main line as well. So I'm hoping with these new creators coming on at the end of this year, we'll get a little bit more creative energy flowing throughout the DC offices and start to get some of the things that we loved so much about DC Rebirth.
Yeah, I think too, just as an overarching comment, is one of the disadvantages that DC had, I think, editorially, is I think that at their summit, I think everyone focused on the fact that, remember, guys, the source wall is down, so darkness coming into the mainstream DC universe. Why are they assuming that because the source wall is down, that everything behind the source wall is bad? Why? Yeah. I can't believe they're restricting their thinking like that. I mean, so much has come out of the source wall that is broken down, and every single bit that's come out of it has been relentlessly negative. Mm-hmm. Why is that the case? And because the problem that it's arising is that all these stories in all the mainstream titles have the same theme. Mm-hmm. Darkness, ultra bad doom and gloom coming. Hawkman is, oh no, doom and gloom. He's having dreams of doom and gloom. Justice League, the totality is coming. Lantern, doom and gloom. Flash War. The Still Force release, screwed up hyper time, can't time travel. Doom and gloom. It's just absolutely relentless.
Yeah. One of the things too that again was brought up in a conversation once with Comic Book University was that, why did you have to break open the entire source wall? Because that limits you in the sense that, hear me out, I know it sounds ironic. It limits you in the sense that, okay, so this is what you're showing me. And this is like, okay, so what it basically says narratively is that what's coming out of the source wall is all we get. Whereas you could have had it be a crack in the source wall and still had all these things come out and leave us wondering, wow, there's so much more behind that. And we've already gotten all this just from a crack in the source wall. You know what I mean? So by doing that, like creatively, and I think literally, they feel like they have more to play with. But realistically, you could have left that same sense of wonder in all of us about the source wall, because that was the glorious thing about it. Was like, what's behind it? You can still find a way to bring things from behind the source wall. Like I said, just do a crack in the source wall rather than the entire thing busting open.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and yeah,
It limits the scope of everything, because it's like, okay, so the source wall busted open. This is the best you got. Like, this is everything. This is everything that was behind the source wall for 60, 70 years. Like, not like, just say, okay, there's a crack in the source wall. All this stuff is coming out of it. And this is only a very minute percentage of what's behind there. Because if you're going to break the source wall, I want crazy. I want wild, wild stuff that Jack Kirby had been alluding to throughout his entire work with the Fourth World. You know what I mean?
oh,
I feel
exactly,
like,
exactly. And just to build on what you're saying, imagine how unbelievably different it would feel that if, can you imagine if a superhero actually came from the source wall now that we haven't seen? Actually a nice person? Actually, like, I mean, come on, like, what about another, why not have explorers from another multiverse, or, you know, following, you know, where's the police force from the dark universe chasing the bad guys into our universe, trying to rescue us from the bad guys that we've attracted? Like,
and they, like, I feel like they're almost saying that, like, all that's behind the source wall is the dark multiverse, but it's like that's not what they had established in Metal. They had said these are two totally separate things, right? What's happening with the dark multiverse is slightly analogous to what happened in Marvel's Secret Wars with all of the incursions. But the source wall is like this floodgate that's been left open. But like you said, everything that's coming out of the source wall is negative. Okay, so maybe since you decided to change the line of the New Age of Heroes, you literally could have had a New Age of Heroes come from behind the source wall. And that would have been a far more, like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a professional writer. Like you said at the beginning of this entire conversation, we're just speculating and throwing out ideas, to the peanut gallery. But I feel like creatively, there's so much more they could be doing with what they have. And again, back to, they have all these toys they can play with. They have all these B and C list characters that are somewhere in the multiverse that even someone like you, who's been reading comics for a long time, probably doesn't even know about. And if you saw this name pop up in a book, you do all this research, like, oh, this is totally different. Like, I'm glad they're doing something with it. For me, I've been reading comic books maybe for close to a decade, somewhere near there. Maybe 7 years at best, but even then that would be refreshing. Just like, there's so much they could do with the opening of the source wall. And I think that while they're quote unquote broadening things by leaving that huge break, they're limiting themselves narratively, because they're like, this is all that's behind this quote unquote ocean that this fishbowl has been led into. That's like saying, I feel like it's because that's the analogy they use, right, the whole time. And that's like saying, okay, out in the ocean, you have 5 new species of fish. That's it.
Yeah. No, that's right. And well, even give you an example, like recently in the pages of Green Lantern, we had an old crew I haven't seen in a while, the Ravagers.
Mm-hmm.
The Ravagers showed up. That's that's from way back in Green Lantern lore. That's like sort of like a B-list group from DC's past. It's cool that they brought that up. They could have look what Tom King did with the Vision, an obscure, well, not totally obscure, but one of the lesser tier characters in the Marvel universe, and with Mr. Miracle, taking these B-list characters and actually being able to, you have more leeway, you have more freedom, creative freedom with a B-list character than you do with other ones.
Absolutely, because I totally agree. Sorry to cut you off. I mean, you totally hit the nail on the head, because you have fans like us that are always like, if you don't write a character the certain way, you're not writing a character right. You know what I mean? There have been established characterizations for these characters, right? So if somebody writes Batman all happy-go-lucky, we're going to be up in arms about it. But these characters have either little previous continuity or none at all. So you can literally do anything and establish one.
Yeah, I mean, you take any of these characters on the New Age of Heroes, and just just something totally wacky. I mean, heck, can you imagine if Blue Beetle showed up in Sideways or The Unexpected or whatever, or Vandal Savage shows up in Immortal Men? Well, I guess before he was killed by Lex and Justice
Yeah.
League. But I mean, but yeah, it just seems. I mean, I know. I don't know. I always, to me, nothing's more important than a sound foundation. And so many writers, they they're really good at writing character, but they're not good at building. They're not good at creating the environment around the character that they want to write about, or vice versa. They're good at writing, having a good foundation, but they're not good in character. It's hard to get them both in one nice tight little package. But yeah, I don't know. But I don't know. It is what it is. I have to say, overall, the New Age for Heroes, given the fact that these are totally new characters for the most part, other than the Terrifics, I have to say I'm not totally surprised. I wasn't expecting it to hit it out of the park. I really wasn't. Right. Because in this marketplace, it's just too glutted. There's just so many comic books out there. Marvel is glutting the market with comic books. DC is increasing their output as well. And the competition is fierce. I think Image is doing great. I mean, the market overall, I think, is very healthy. But the same number of people are buying comics, and so there's a lot of competition there for our comic book buying bucks.
Well, yeah. And again, coattailing off of that, if you look at things, back in the 40s and 50s, the reason comic books were so huge was because there really wasn't a big presence of media and multimedia for people to consume. Now you have the internet, which is practically limitless. You have YouTube, you have movies, you have a plethora of games, whether it be console or computer games. So again, there's a lot of competition for this money. And in order for you to keep up, especially as a literary medium, as a paper medium, so something that's not digital, you need to create like you said, a solid foundation and get people interested in these stories. I can't say that I necessarily had traditional upbringing with comics. Like I read Final Crisis, and unlike most people who would probably be like, this is confusing amount, I was like, this is confusing, I have no idea what's going on, I want to know what's going on. But like, yeah, you need to find a way to bring people in and make them feel welcomed and see the, and it's not easy, but they have already shown that they started doing it at the beginning of Rebirth, because they're like, this is the characters you love that we've established over the years and know that you love doing new things. You know what I mean? Like Batman getting married, spoilers, it didn't happen. The idea is pretty fresh, because the only marriage I only remember seeing of Batman was in the Silver Age, when it was jokey. But like a serious consummation of Batman and blank person would be something new and different and welcomed, because it doesn't feel forced. Superman having a son is one of the best things that's happened to Superman in the last decade, inarguably.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting. It's actually nice to see. It's refreshing to see a more of a focus, a greater inclination of both Marvel and DC to embrace the idea of family. You see it with Superman and Lois and Jonathan Kent, and even with the teasing of Batman and Catwoman, the fact that they even had a non-wedding is, I think, an accomplishment, given the fact that Dan Didio, this was a guy who just a few short years ago didn't think that Bat characters could be happy in a relationship. I mean, they've come a long way.
Well, I mean, I feel like right now is where he's like dipping his fingers back in there, because Jeff Johns is no longer an executive. Jim Lee is focusing more probably on his role as a chief creative officer, right? So that leaves Dan Didio with a big fraction of the publisher's responsibility. And if you look at things, John Kent's off in space, right? Damian is angsty with Batman. Bruce didn't get married. Clark is so insecure about it, is insecure about his relationship with his wife. Like, I don't know who to blame, the writers or Dan Didio, for not realizing that you're taking away the things that people loved about Rebirth. Like, as much as people hate Damian, and people claim to hate Damian, Damian. They love reading him in the book because it's funny to see the dichotomy between both him and John and him and his father, and the dichotomy between him and Dick, because that's what made, for example, Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin so popular. So they're messing with these dichotomies, like, and again, like what I said at the beginning of the discussion here. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah. No, the relationship between Damian and Batman, as originally, Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason's original Batman and Robin run will always be classic, because that relationship is so beautifully rendered between Damian and the narcissistic young Damian, and wanting to impress Batman and impress his dad. I mean, that's just classic.
Well, I mean, in both senses too, both in that and in the Batman and Robin by Grant Morrison, Peter Tomasi, Peter Tomasi is one of the best guys that half the people in comics don't know about, because he gets characters, he gets storytelling, he gets how to craft he gets how to craft stories, and he's proven it in his Superman, which was an overwhelming success, coming from someone like me who did not give a shit about Superman in the New 52 landscape, like a lot of other people did. He brought me into it. His Batman and Robin was one of the most consistent books we've seen in the last, dare I say, decade.
Yeah, it was really, really good. And unfortunately, I think you're right that, DC's in danger of sort of moving away from that, the idea that, heroes can't be happy. There's something's just inherently wrong about that. I've got some trepidation about the whole idea of Sanctuary, about heroes in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little, I don't mind the idea of post. It's almost like, well, Dan Didio even called it. He said it's like the modern day version. It's like the present day version of Identity
Crisis.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit too real. Post traumatic stress disorder for heroes. Well, yeah, I guess. I'm not saying it can't be a great story, and if anybody could pull it off, it's, Tom King's got some background with this. He was a former CIA agent, and he wrote Sheriff of Babylon. I'm sure he's familiar with the effect that violence has on a psyche.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see his take on it. But it is a movement away from that baseline of what makes us all happy. What helps us get through the stress of our day? It's the family. It's those relationships, and there's just not, there's a reason why Superman and Batman were successful, and it's no coincidence that for Batman it was his relationship with his son Damian, and then building on with Catwoman, and for Superman it was bringing back Lois.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I feel like for people who get paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to handle these characters, they really don't know that much about them until it comes time for a press conference or a panel. They're like, well, this is successful. So out in the crowd, they're like, well, obviously we had to do this, but you're taking it away. So obviously you don't have a clue what the hell you're doing. You know what I mean? The moments where comic books work the most is when comic book fans are the ones that move up in the ranks and start to become integral in the editing process or in the storytelling,
and you just described, and that's Jeff Johns and Donny Cates.
Exactly.
That's Jeff Johns and Donny Cates to a T.
Exactly. And that's why Jeff Johns, I have never read a thing of Jeff Johns I've hated. There are things I've read by Jeff Johns that I didn't love, but it's also a situation where I realize not every book is written for me. You know what I mean? For example, there are sensibilities in his Batman Year One that I love. There are things that I don't quite care for, but I realize Batman Year One is just not a book for me. You know why? Because I love the in continuity Batman, and there's not saying that you can't love both, but you know what I mean? I've never read anything of Jeff Johns that is bad. And there's a difference between what I like and what I think is good or bad. I try to be somewhat objective about it.
Yeah. I hear you. I have to use the washroom, so I'll have to go for I need 20 seconds, so I'll just be right back. I'm trying to see if I can flip my picture here. Well, I'll go to my profile. There it is. Oops.
I mean, you know, on the topic, I think that what's going on with the new age of heroes is ultimately, you know, a reflection of what's going on. But I mean, to be honest, you know, we're treading on about 2 hours of the conversation, so we could probably even just cut things off here. Um, but you know, do you have any closing words about the topic?
Uh, just that I hope that the unexpected and that sideways and terrific survives the new age, but I suspect that I suspect that I suspect that they're only going to last for maybe 12, maybe 24 issues, and they're just going to join the mainstream of DC B-list heroes. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are kind of going to be lost into oblivion. And you know what? At the beginning of this all, I had every single one of these books on my pull list. Not because I thought they were going to go up in value, actually the opposite. I was just hoping for some good stories that that have different sensibilities than what I've been reading as of late. I want it to succeed, and again, I don't see it succeeding super hard. You know, there are a couple standout characters that I think will eventually find their way into other stories, but ultimately, I think everything's going to be kind of it's already on a downward slope, and I again hope that's not going to continue to be a reflection of the mainline DC books. But you know, with that being said, you know, to you, Rocky, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with me. I had a good time talking.
Thanks for inviting me. It's nice.
Yeah, man. Anytime. It was informative, you know, just getting different perspectives on what's going on in all of the books. And again, you've kind of touched upon books that I have either been disheartened by or have not really given a chance to. And it's always good to hear another perspective. And then, you know, we got a lot into the conversation of what's going on in the greater sphere of the DC universe. So, you know, I had a great time. Thank you again. It was great chatting with you. And if you guys aren't already who are watching, check him out. His channel is called ComicBoom. He does review videos. What do you do? Like 4 or 5 a week, right? You put up quite a few.
I try to do 4 or 5 a week. Sometimes I only do 2 or 3. It depends on my schedule and stuff. But yeah.
If you guys aren't watching him, man, he puts out these great honest reviews, and that's the big reason why I reached out to communicate and chat and collaborate with this guy. He's a great YouTuber. If you're not watching his stuff, you should be. So definitely go over there. There's a link in the description to his channel, so go check it out. If you also go to my channel, in my featured channels, he's also there. So go check him out. You know, more than likely, I will ask him to be on the channel again in the future because he adds a lot to the conversation. And do you have any new videos that you want to promote? Just let people know what's going on with you.
Well, I'll be a little bit behind this week, but just check out my channel. I do a lot of different videos, and just you know, it's all about the comics, and you know, we are gifted that we live in a day and age where we can not only collect comic books, but they make billion-dollar movies about them. So life is good.
Life is good, and we are in a world where we can actually judge comic books based on literary standards and not just crazy bona fide action. But in terms of my way, I'll be putting out a video, a comics pull list video soon. I intended on doing it before my interview with Brian Hill, but between organizing that and organizing this and work upon other things, I am a little bit late on it. It will be coming out within the next day or so, hopefully tomorrow. It'll have Justice League Dark, Detective 985 again by Hill, and Teen Titans number 20, and exploring the new team dynamic there. So thank you all for watching. Thanks everyone for your input. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Hopefully we'll see you soon on the next episode of Let's Talk Comics. So this is Dark Knight Nation and ComicBoom signing off.
See you guys later.
Bye, guys.